You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Music Tectonics podcast. I am your host for today, Tristra Newyear Yeagar, Director of Strategy at Rock, Paper, Scissors, Inc., the music tech PR firm. Today we have a really fun guest who's joining us, and I'm really excited to have it's hopefully going to be a wide-ranging, fun, and slightly crazy pants conversation about music technology, intellectual property, mashups, you name it, we're going to cover it. We'll see what happens here. So my guest today is Aram Sinnreich, who is a professor and chair of the Communication Studies Division at American University's School of Communication. Aram's work focuses on the intersection of culture, law, and technology, with an emphasis on subjects such as surveillance, we're going to get into creepy territory here, critical data studies, intellectual property, remix culture, and music, most importantly, last but definitely not least. He's written 3 books, including Mashed Up, The Piracy Crusade, which is a really fun read, and The Essential Guide to Intellectual Property, which is probably also a fun read, especially considering the topic. So, Aram has also written for publications like the New York Times, Billboard, and Wired, and has another book coming out in 2023 called The Secret Life of Data, which I'm sure will be very scandalous. So, as well as all of this incredible scholarly and thought leadership type work, Aram also is a musician who is a working musician, has an album that he's releasing with his, Aram, you can tell us a bit about that project at the end of our chat today, as well as a sci-fi novel coming out in 2023. And I should probably mention this in the interest of full disclosure. Aram is a good friend of mine and a former bandmate who put up with my younger self with a great deal of kindness. So if our conversation sounds like a chat between old friends, there's a reason for that. So Aram, thanks so much for joining me today.
Oh, Tristra, it's a pleasure to hear your voice.
And the feeling is mutual. So unfortunately, the pleasure may end now because we're going to talk about Web3 for a second, if you don't mind.
No. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, we're gonna wade into the metaverse, up to our knees or maybe our eyeballs. So, but really, as someone who's thought for a lot about intellectual property, the digital life of music, data, all of that, this must be kind of a crazy time for you. I mean, in one way, the way I'm thinking about it is we're in this interesting point when it comes to concepts and practices around digital ownership. And it involves IP, it involves centuries old laws. And what we kind of come up with now could determine a lot of fan and artist experiences in the near and long-term future. So I'm wondering, as someone who's been watching this space for a long time and has a lot of thoughts about it, how do you see it? Is there a lot that's really new here, or is this kind of like same song, new cover? Like, is it this sort of the same as it ever was, despite the hype?
Well, it's obviously, the underlying technology of Web3 is pretty new, the whole blockchain infrastructure. But the basic issues, the kind of tension between music as a kind of operating system for society and a shared set of cultural touchstones on the one hand, and as a scarce commodity exploited in the marketplace for profit on the other hand, that's a tale as old as time. What's interesting to me about it is the kind of the hoops that people will jump through in order to generate artificial scarcity after going through all the trouble of creating a platform that allows everybody to get access to everything always, forever. One thing that we've been talking about in the music industry since my days as an industry analyst back in the late 1990s, turn of the century, was how you could simultaneously create a business model that would incentivize artists to produce work and incentivize labels and publishers to put work out into the marketplace, while at the same time taking advantage of all of the cool features that the internet offers, like giving people access to the entire cultural archive with the click of the button and making sure that nobody gets left out of the equation. And when I say nobody left out, I don't just mean consumers getting access to tens of millions of songs the way that you would on Spotify or Apple Music, but also artists. People of a certain age, like you and me, I mean, back when we started out as working musicians, there was no way to get your music on the radio unless you were assigned to a big label. And there was no way to get your music onto store shelves unless you put a bunch of boxes of cassettes in the back of your car and drove around from store to store begging them to buy 10 at wholesale price or on spec. So the access that the internet provides to independent and smaller label musicians to the global marketplace is indispensable. So yeah, I think there's a real tension between wanting to open things up and wanting to close things down. And there's no good guys or bad guys, but there's also no such thing as an infinitely large pie that everybody can have a slice of. And so every decision we make about laws and technologies and economics, and even about cultural decisions, like what kinds of genres we're going to support and what kinds of artists we think are serious or important, are ultimately kind of ranked choice decisions about who gets to participate and who doesn't, and who gets all the oxygen. And one of the things I think has been interesting is that after, there's a kind of period of time between like Napster and the introduction of Spotify in the US, where there really was a massive widening up of the music marketplace to new entrants, to new styles, musicians from different regions, musicians from different genres. And the kind of apex of this was the MySpace moment. And I know you remember this because you're a working musician too. And you may have already been at RPS at the time. I'm not sure, but when MySpace came out, it was like the greatest thing that had ever happened to bands, because you could just throw a bunch of tracks streaming online, and then people would email you and ask you to play gigs and offer you contracts and invite you to festivals and stuff like that. And very rapidly, a combination of interests began to shut that down, because creating a gateway that limits access of market entrants to consumers is the biggest business model in the world. And Facebook has really perfected that, although obviously the major labels and the Spotifys and Apples of the world have played a large role as well. But Facebook's whole business model is now selling brands access to their own consumers, right? And that's something that you can't really do except at scale. And so what we've seen happening over the past 10 years is actually that it's become even more of a winner-take-all market than it was prior to the invention of the internet. And just a handful of artists are responsible for the vast bulk of economic activity in the music marketplace, which I think is bad for everybody else.
It's interesting too. I love the way you talk about music as an operating system for our culture and our society. It's interesting too to think about the openness to the passive enjoyment of music, right? Like fans are often put in this quasi-passive position, and yet what a lot of folks are excited about when it comes to Web3 technologies and the sort of communities that are popping up around it are the active community. And again, we can talk about what community is, and I feel like there's a big ethnographic chunk that's missing from our conversation about this stuff. But
there are people out there doing the work.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
It's not always part of the conversation.
Yeah, and that's a really sad thing, is that the silos are so taught, and many academics are sort of disincentivized to go out and start talking to the crypto bros on Twitter and having helpful conversations. Anyway, that aside, there's this idea that artists, first of all, have a direct relationship with all the people who appreciate their work. And there's this idea that the work could be an ongoing, ever-evolving thing, which in some ways is a curious dream. I mean, it's sort of a weird mix of like the folk music ideal, right? And the sort of idea of having works of art that incorporate all of the media, right? Like all the visual movement, taste, touch. Exactly. I didn't want to go there. I was like, what is another word for Gesamtkunstwerk? But you're an academic, so you can say that word.
I'm a friend of Tristra's. I had to know this.
Anywho, so it's this weird moment, right, where everyone technically can start to make music more and more easily and more fluently in a way that could express something important for them. But that throws this whole recorded music paradigm into this strange place, right? Like it's almost like we're going to have two operating systems, right? One where people are making stuff all the time and it's ephemeral and they don't care and they don't really want, maybe they want to share it, maybe they don't. And then there's the people who are dedicated professionals or something like that, or aspiring to be. I don't know what. It's crazy.
It is crazy. Look, it's always been the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even before there was such a thing as a music industry, music has been pretty strictly regulated by the powers that be, right? Like the ancient Egyptian dynasties used to put up giant stone monoliths telling people what kinds of music they were allowed to play and what kinds of music they weren't allowed to play, right? The Catholic Church famously micromanaged music
Tonality, yeah.
up through the Baroque era,
Yeah.
for 1500 years, and would bring down the heavy manners on people who were not obeying church prescribed harmonies. And so things begin to change with the development of the printing press and the birth of the modern music industry with the rise of music publishers in the 16th and 17th centuries. And then the creation of copyright, which gets applied to music over the next 200 or 300 years. But I don't see that as the beginning of something so much as the transformation of this power that's always been exerted over music in order to control it. Music is really dangerous because it's the operating system for human consciousness and human culture, because music is how people orient themselves, understand who they are and what their relationship to other people is. Music it's a medium for oral history, for cultural memory, for international relations and intercultural relations, right? We use music for our national anthems. We use it at ballparks. We use it when we're getting soldiers ready for war. We use it on prisoners to torture them when they're under lock and key, right? Music is a lot more than just an entertainment medium. And because of that tremendous power it has always been subject to these battles over control. And once music becomes synonymous with a physical commodity, once it becomes a printed score, and later on, once it becomes a recording that gets distributed as vinyl or cassette or CD or what have you, we begin to think about music in those kinds of physical terms, and the kind of battle over the control of music becomes the battle over the control of those objects. Right? It's kind of a little bit of a bait and switch operation where we start to think that the CD is the music or that the recording is the music. But the reality is that music has always been, to use your term, ephemeral, right? There is no such thing as a finished product. And when you look back at, like, in my first book in Mashed Up, I wrote about this crazy story about Hector Berlioz, the romantic musician, who got really upset and staged this massive public awareness campaign because this publisher had dared to edit some of Beethoven's harmonies, and he thought Beethoven was like the greatest genius of all time. And so he tried to get this guy blacklisted, basically, and ended up kind of getting blacklisted himself because the guy that he was messing with was more powerful than he was. So that was a battle over when Beethoven puts the last drop of ink on the page. Is the composition finished, or is it still a living, breathing thing? And in some ways, the publisher who messed with Beethoven's harmonies, was kind of more progressive than the young firebrand Berlioz was when he tried to get him kicked out of the academy for messing with Beethoven, right? This question of ephemerality, it's like a game of hot potato, right? Like, when somebody does not want music to be ephemeral, what that means is that they want it to be static. They want it to be frozen in time and place. They want it to be a known quantity that is delimited, that has a finite set of dimensions to it. And then you have to ask yourself, what's that person's interest in that? Why doesn't this person want somebody to have the power to interpret or edit or sample or cut and paste or re-genreify or whatever other operations people do? Why doesn't somebody want this piece of music to live and breathe? What do they have invested in the version that they think is definitive? And that question is huge. But the short answer to it is that it speaks to all of those different social functions we were talking about before. To decide definitively this is the official piece of music and that is not the official piece of music is essentially to say definitively these uses are official and those uses are non-official, and therefore these users are official and those users are non-official, and you're essentially using music to create a social hierarchy, a power hierarchy. So when I look at, like Web3 and I look at NFTs and all of that crap, it seems to me like really very much the same set of efforts to, like you all can have the MP3 version of this, but my MP3 is the only official MP3 because the blockchain tells me so. And that means that mine is more economically valuable. And that means that I am the king shit and the rest of you are a bunch of pishers who've got nothing going for them. Right. And it doesn't need to, there's no technological or economic need for it to be that way. But we seem to have some kind of psychosocial need to organize ourselves hierarchically. And we keep using music and technology as a way to do that.
Well, let's look at a different aspect of music and another way that it can operate. And that's something that people love to talk about. They talked about it with the first internet explosion and the MySpace era. They talked about it with, Web 2.0. They talked about it with Web 3. And that there is this sort of longing, or at least this longing to believe that there could be a flattening of this hierarchy, right? And that technology could somehow magically help us unlock that, and that would unlock a great deal of human potential through creativity, through people using music to maybe manage their emotions, calibrate their mind body, or whatever, however we want to think about it, or make music with other people and reach across maybe cultural rifts or gaps. What do you see any flattening? I mean, that you pointed out really well how the hierarchy is being reconstructed in Web3, and what are some of the more flattening tendencies that you're seeing?
Well, the peer-to-peer moment, the kind of Napster through LimeWire period, showed a real flattening in terms of power over distribution, which led to, I think, in my both quantitative and qualitative analysis, I've seen a lot of evidence that people's tastes expanded during that period of time. And, taste is really a marker. There was this, you probably read him, this French sociologist named Pierre Bourdieu, who wrote this book called Distinction about 40 years ago. And what, the point of his book was that, in his words, taste classifies, and it classifies the classifier, right? So if you're a hoity-toity opera lover, that means you're super fancy. And if, you're into like trap music, that means something else. And if you're into like, classic rock, that means something else. And what happens when people don't have to pay to invest in a music library is that they get much broader tastes, which actually means that they can explore many more dimensions of their identity and communicate and share tastes with a much broader range of people, which has the potential to democratize and flatten out society. So I think to the extent that you can use Web3 technology in ways like DAOs, DAOs, that kind of create non-hierarchical ownership and power structures surrounding the production and use of cultural information, you can kind of hardwire a kind of flattening out into it. But the problem is that DAOs themselves, just by virtue of being so techy and arcane, not to mention bro-y,
pre-select.
They do pre-select, right? So there's a kind of invisible kind of velvet rope surrounding them, which is every bit as elitist as the velvet rope surrounding the entrance to the opera house. And so you have to look like the proof is in the pudding, and this is why I loved mashups so much. When I wrote the book Mashed Up, what I found most interesting about it wasn't. I mean, I loved a lot of the music. I thought some of the early mashups were just absolutely brilliant and hilarious, and dangerous. But what I loved most about it is, I'd interview the people who were like doing these mashup clubs like Booty, and they'd say, we've got like 3 generations of people from every ethnicity, gay and straight, all dancing together to the same songs, right? And how often do you see that, right? See people from completely different cultural identities and communities in the same room getting down together to the same music, right? It's really, really, really difficult to produce music that so many different people can relate to and share in their love for. And so I think, the proof is ultimately in the pudding, right? If you look at a DAO or you look at a club or you look at a marketplace, and what you see is a broad range of people all connecting through music, despite their cultural differences, or even better yet, through their cultural differences, through some kind of reconciliation of them, then you're flattening things out. But if you walk into the room and it's the same person over and over again, like you'll see at the front row of the opera house, nothing that you say is going to change the fact that it's a fundamentally elitist, hierarchical structure that you've built for yourself, and you should be ashamed, and you should go home and think about what you did.
Exactly. I like how you're recommending a good timeout
for some of these punishment. So
but you bring up mashups, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about that. I think that is an excellent example of how certain kinds of changes in technology can really facilitate a whole new aesthetic, right? So whereas people were trying to do this stuff before, it'd be really, really hard to do this with analog. So and without access.
Say it wasn't done.
Oh no, of course, you could do all sorts of crazy shit, but it took way more skill, way more time. Like, you'd have to really be dedicated to do a mashup using tape or something. So, tell me a bit about just how you see, and we can talk about something besides mashups, how you were thinking about the ways technology can sort of influence our aesthetics, and whether that's bringing us something new, giving it new opportunities, or maybe even, narrowing. I mean, we've talked about broadening tastes too. But how is it also channeling us down certain things? Like, for instance, we could talk about something like Autotune, where people start expecting that the vocals will have at least a dash of Autotune. And I'm not an Autotune hater, but
yeah, me neither.
But just saying that technology can both open up our minds and give us more crazy things we can try and experiment with, like mashups. It can also narrow it. So give me a little bit of your insights on that front.
Sure. Well, I think, technology doesn't do anything to music. I think people do things with technology through music, right? So if you think about it, like, every musical aesthetic is people communicating to people, right? Packing a whole bunch of meaning into a couple of sound waves. It's like a hologram, right? Like, you just look at, like, there have been these incredible studies where people can hear like a tenth of a second of music and identify with 90% accuracy what genre that music is in, right? So like a teensy little bit of musical information carries a tremendous punch in terms of giving our brains information about who's making the music, who that music is for, what the music is supposed to mean, what kind of mood is associated with it, what kind of social use goes along with it, all of that stuff. So the way that I think about it, all music incorporates an understanding, a tacit understanding of the kind of enabling technologies for production and distribution and consumption into that music, right? So, very famously, we could go back to, the rise of Baroque music. Baroque was keyboard music, right? And the keyboard itself was this kind of unholy mathematical, hodgepodge that kind of cut the octave into these 12 even totally mathematically ridiculous relationships to each other, but allowed you to play in different keys, and therefore, anytime you hear music that's in a chromatic scale, you are listening to the kind of cultural and technological history of the industrialized Europe, right, and the creation of the 12-tone scale, and the piano keyboard, and the getting rid of all of the other tones in the scale, which, as you know very well, is not the case for microtonal musics like Asian music or African music or what have you. And so I think the same thing is true if you look at modern music. Somebody like Phil Spector was very famous. His wall of sound music was produced for like for portable radios, something that would sound good when somebody was listening to a transistor radio on the beach, right? And so that technology was kind of anticipated in the aesthetic. And I think the same thing is very true now. People are making music that is intended to be listened to on like Beats headphones, and cranking up the bass and letting most of the kind of fun stuff happen in that region spectrographically. There's no such thing as a music that does not take into account the technology of it. I was talking about opera before, right? Opera is written for opera houses. It's music that is intended to carry and fill up a giant room like that, right? That's very different than your favorite singer-songwriter crooning intimately into a microphone, which sounds like you're in bed with them, right? So I think the same goes for Autotune, by the way. I don't think Autotune is any more limiting or contrived than a piano keyboard is, right? A piano keyboard takes the entire universe of different tones and only selects 12 of them over and over again, and eliminates all, makes the rest technologically impossible to play, right? Unless you're like John Cage or something and you're messing with the piano.
The thing that's so interesting about Autotune is because there's, we're used to listening, our ears, and our brains are tuned to listen to all of the nuances of voices, and it kind of segments the nuances like the piano. And in some ways I often think of Autotune as like an ornamentation layer, right? Like if you were to somehow have someone who could perform all sorts of crazy vocal ornaments while singing a main melody at the same time. Anyway, it is.
Well, it makes it makes melismatic technique very different, right?
Yeah,
you're a melismatic singer, so you know whereof I speak. Like I've heard you sing all these like Bosnian folk songs and stuff, which is this kind of throaty overtone melismatic singing with drone that you can never do with Autotune. But you can. Here's the interesting. There's this great video that people who are listening to this can look up on YouTube if they want, which is
we can throw it in the show notes too.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Yeah, it's Stevie Wonder singing "Close to You" using a talk box on TV in like 1971.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
And it's basically like the precursor to modern R&B Autotune. But the way that I've always and he's doing, he's got the little tube going into his mouth and he's playing the notes on the keyboard as he sings, so that all the notes are coming from the keyboard, right? And then he's using his mouth as a resonator.
Wow.
Right? That old technology?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So when I show that to like my students, like he is performing Techno Blackness, right? He's using like post-gospel African-American, like, melismatic techniques along with this technology that's supposed to chop things up and make them inhuman, but he's rehumanizing the technology. And
it sounds like such a Stevie Wonder thing to do.
It is. That was like his whole shtick, right? Yeah. But it's like John Henry, right? Like he is demonstrating this through his mastery of the technology. He's demonstrating the essential power and value of his humanity, right? By like I can take even this janky piece of tech and I can make it soulful as shit. I'm going to do it on live television so everybody can see it. Right?
Amazing.
And I think that the best R&B artists do that with Autotune, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're not using Autotune to hide weaknesses. They're using Autotune to exaggerate their strengths.
Yeah,
right?
it can be a big flex because you can hear how spot on their transitions are, and how it does really like make the ornaments pop and the melisma pop. It's pretty
totally
cool.
Or like a pointillist artist, or like Picasso in his blue period. Like let's take a very limited palette and let's tell a story of infinite depth. Paint a tableau of infinite depth using this tiny little palette, right? In a way, that's a bigger flex than having like every color in the rainbow available to you.
Exactly. Well, this is awesome. So I always ask everybody that I get to talk to about their dreams for the future. So Aram, this is our moment where we get a little sci-fi, and you get to talk about. And hey, if you've been working on some sci-fi fiction, and I don't know like how you're framing it and whether you're talking about it's like 100 years in the future or 3 million. What's the music? How do you imagine music being made in the future? And you can chop that down into a tiny little element. Like, I have this great, like, what if instruments did this? Or what if we could do this? Or what if we listened in this way? What are you thinking? What's your vision for the future in music?
I have a couple of answers to that.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, sorry, I know I go long.
No, I love it.
So right, like 2 years ago, I think in 2019, I got asked to write like a piece for Naxos, the classical music
Yeah.
label. They were starting like a new website, and they asked me to write an article for them. And they wanted me to write something. They were inviting people to write about what they thought were the ritualistic musical spaces of the 21st century, or something.
Whoa,
like that. It's like
is
a very
fun.
high concept thing.
I love
Right?
it.
So the editor, this great ethnomusicologist, in her own right, I was like 99% certain that she wanted me to say that the internet is the ritualistic space for music in the 21st century, and that that I would talk about mashups and all that stuff that you and I have kind of been talking about. And what I thought about it, and what I ended up writing instead, was that I thought the ritualistic space for music in the 21st century was going to be actual geographic space. Because the internet has become so totalizing and normative and pervasive and ubiquitous, and so intrinsic to our understanding of how music is made, distributed, listened to, shared, bought, sold, interpreted, commented upon, that music made between two, like by one human being for another human being, listened to through the air molecules in a shared space, that is now the special exception. That's now the ritualistic space for where especially meaningful music takes place. And then immediately after I published that, COVID happened, and we all got shut down, and all of us had to stop gigging in person, and we all started like only gigging online and doing like these streaming concerts and stuff. Which, I don't know about you, like, I mean, it's better than nothing, but I mean, it's like, it's like VR pornography compared to like, having sex with someone you love. It's like a completely different experience that in many ways suffers tremendously for lack of like
an embodied presence.
An embodied presence. That's a very generous way to put it, right? So after spending like a year and a half only gigging in my basement on a live stream, I really came to realize how quickly we'd come around to and the first time I played a gig in person, I won't say post-COVID because it's still happening, but peri-COVID, I was almost in tears. It was only for like 20, 25 people, but it felt so powerful to watch the faces and bodies of the people that I was playing for as I played these songs, and to see them smile and to hear them clap like in person. And I realized like I'd done this, I don't know, how many times have you and I gigged together? Hundreds of times, right? I've done this thousands of times in my life, but I took it so for granted so many of those times. It wasn't until it was deprived from me that I fully appreciated how special it is to just be a couple of human beings in a room together making sounds that mean something,
Yeah, I had a similar experience with finally hearing people sing together after 18 months of not, and it's a deeply moving experience, and I hope everyone gets to have something of that, and maybe we could figure out a way to have that without a pandemic, but that's a whole other conversation.
So let me give you the other answer to your question.
Yeah, give me the other answer.
Let me fast forward. I actually think that from a technological standpoint, the most interesting and potentially challenging and therefore generative thing happening in music right now is AI generated music. And here's how I see it going down. You look at like a company like Spotify. Spotify is they spend roughly 70% of their income just on content acquisition, right? And which is good because we, recording artists and composers like to be paid.
That's nice. Yeah,
it's good to be paid. And everybody's saying, "Oh, well, Spotify should pay more. I only make 0.6 of a cent." What, they can't pay more because they don't make that much, right?
Yeah.
There isn't any more to pay. right? There's like consumers will not be paying $100 a month for Spotify ever. So you're never going to get your like 10 cents per stream. It's never going to happen. So just give it up, right? But from Spotify's standpoint, they've tried to cut down their content acquisition costs in all kinds of ways, some of them ethical and some less so, right? Like, let's invest in podcasts. If they can get you to listen to podcasts instead of listening to music, they have to pay less for every hour that you spend on their service, and therefore they reap more in terms of profits. They hire all these producers to make genre, like, to pad out their playlists. They have like the dope, fresh, funky jams playlist, and the beats to relax to and chill with playlist, and all these like kind of micro genre playlists. And then instead of playing 10 songs in a row by like recording artists, they will like stick in a couple of tunes that they made in-house, like paying someone $500 a pop to produce 3 minutes of like muzak hip hop.
Yeah, piano lo-fi chill beats or piano music for study kind of stuff.
Yeah. Massage music, right? Like just the emptiest, least communicative music you can imagine. But they'll stick it in there because if they create an entire playlist of that, you would log off and stop paying them. But if they stick one or two in to the hour, you're not going to stop listening and you won't object. And you'll never know because they give these in-house tracks, like they'll call the artist like DJ Cactus Face, okay, like, and then you look, there's only one track by DJ Cactus Face.
I kind of wish that there had been. I don't think there probably is a DJ Cactus Face because there's apparently a little everything my kids have discovered. Yeah. But DJ Cactus Face is a good one. So Spotify content team, take note. Anyway.
Yeah. So I'm going somewhere here. So I think ultimately, so algorithmically generated genre music is already a thing that exists now. And there are a bunch of cottage companies out there, mostly coming out of university labs backed by venture money, that, promise to, like, it started out with like, this computer made a Beethoven score that even experts can't tell wasn't by Beethoven.
Yeah.
But now it's just like, you can just like, and it's not just music, like GPT does this with text and ImageNet does this with photos, but you can basically procedurally generate any kind of genre music, especially non-vocal music, very, very quickly at this point.
And so, you can also take it up a notch and have an artist's stems or sound packs or whatever, and basically weave a huge endless track by whatever your favorite electronic artist or producer. So
absolutely,
you can have a little bit more human character, but it is very programmatic.
And I wrote about this a bit in the book that I'm working on now, The Secret Life of Data. But
fun.
There was that Nirvana song, the quote new unquote Nirvana song that was quote unquote written by an AI. And here's the interesting thing about it is if you actually look at how it's done, it's not as simple as pressing a button, right? So in the case of the Nirvana song, the way that it basically worked was they fed all of the sheet music and recordings for Nirvana into a machine learning algorithm, and the machine learning algorithm spit out all of these different kind of melodic and timbral options, and then a human being chose between those options and assembled something together that sounded legit to their ears, and then hired a Kurt Cobain sound-alike to sing the lyrics that were generated by the machine learning algorithm.
Yeah,
it was really a collaboration between the human being and the computer to produce this thing. So my guess is that Spotify and co and Netflix and Amazon and Apple and the rest of these guys will probably be investing very heavily in AI generated entertainment, including music. In fact, I suspect that The Witcher was written by an AI. And I mean that. No, I'm not kidding. I strongly suspect it.
We'll have to point out some Witcher bot or not bot plot points.
Anyway, it would explain. Let's just say it would explain a lot. But I suspect that they will do what they've already been doing with their kind of in-house produced music, and they'll just kind of seed. They'll A/B test their AI music with consumers to see what passes the smell test and what doesn't. And then they'll get smarter and smarter and smarter. And at some point flip the switch and offer you like an all AI channel or an all AI service that's like, $2 a month instead of $5 a month or whatever. And then that's going to open up all kinds of interesting questions, because we don't yet have a way to account for AI authorship in American copyright law.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know there's been attempts using both like the algorithms as a quote unquote rights holder and using the people who created the algorithm. Like, yeah, it's very murky territory.
Yeah. And ultimately, it's a circle that can't be squared unless, well, so copyright.
Yeah.
Copyright is essentially, and this is something I've written about like at disgusting length elsewhere, but copyright is like a signifier of personhood in Western liberal societies, right? Like in order to have a copyright, you have to be an author. And in order to be an author, you have to be a human being. So famously, like there were actually legal debates in America prior to the Civil War as to whether a slave could own a copyright.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And the answer was that they couldn't. There's legal precedent saying that enslaved humans could not own a copyright because they were not humans, right? And neither could their owners have the copyright. So if an enslaved person composed something, it would not be copyrightable because neither the slave nor the owner, the slave master, would have the right to the work, right? So this is an issue that predates AI, and there's so many parallels between AI and slavery, by the way, which like to a disgusting degree. But I think it's kind of an issue that America punted by outlawing slavery, 160 years ago,
which was a good move. But yeah, it avoided the issue of personhood and copyright.
the single best move in American history. Although we're slipping backwards. But yeah, so I think that whole complex, because it opens up a Pandora's box, it forces us to ask the question, can an AI be a human? And if they can't, why not?
Or at least a person, right? Like an entity, correct, a legal entity who has some sort of at least limited personhood.
Right. And remember
Ouch.
That the whole rationale, not just the rationale, the legal basis for copyright in the American system is the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8, which specifies that the only reason Congress has the power to create copyright laws is to incentivize artists to create, to add to give them an economic incentive to share their work with the public through the marketplace. So computers can't be economically incentivized. They don't need to earn salaries. Right. So even by a constitution, we would have to rethink what the Constitution means just in order to create a copyright for AI music.
Wow. Well, here's the other thing I wanted to throw your way. And that is, I personally think that AI and human, that we're going to look at a hybrid scenario. And I'm not talking like the kind of cyborg thing, blah, blah, blah. But something kind of way more fluid and maybe more distinct, or maybe not. But I can see like multiple humans plus an AI collaborating in a very, to what us would feel like kind of terrifying and seamless way to make things and alter things. And so
like an Elon Musk like brain portal interface.
I think that is ridiculous, because I don't think the brain actually is past a certain point. We can't get to the nuance of how the brain assigns function to certain places. We may never know that, right? But it may be through just like more ordinary things that like fingers and fingers and faces and who knows what else, gestures, shimmies. People get to shake their hips together, and the AI is like, okay, great, here's your symphony. But
I love that.
Yeah, let's make that happen.
I've had that fantasy. No, I have. I remember being a kid and thinking like, I remember actively having the thought like, I wish I could translate the way I'm wiggling my toes right now into music.
Yeah.
But that's what we've always done. That's what all instruments are. That's
absolutely
what a drum is.
Yeah. Right? And that's what lots of dances are ways to make music by moving in certain patterns together. So it's kind of, it's anyway, I think it's definitely a hybrid thing. Like there's a lot of oppositional talk, like the robots, the worst being the robots are going to steal our jobs, or they're making music, they're making like art into like nonsense, or like, they're undermining the value of art, which is not possible, in a big picture sense. But there's definitely going to be a mix. It's going to be a real back and forth, and some people will want to use more AI, and some people will be like, seriously, well, I'm just going to like set this up and let it run, and then, send it to the massage company.
Oh yeah, 100%.
As the massage music.
By the way, like, you know me, but your listeners don't. I am a total like atavist. Like, my principal instrument is the upright bass. Like, that's how square and old-fashioned I am. So I talk a good game about AI music and Autotune and mashups and stuff. But when it comes down to it, if I have an hour to make music, I'm not going to make a fucking mashup. I'm going to go downstairs and practice my bass and like try to sound as much like Ron Carter as I can. Like, and ultimately, like,
See, an AI can help you with that.
I'm sure they could help me with my golf swing too if I played golf. But no, but so I mean, and this gets back to what we were talking about in the beginning, and what I think is like the central issue, right? Which is that we have to stop confusing music as a human practice from music as a commodity. They have a lot to do with each other, and they reflect on each other in many ways, but they're fundamentally different sets of questions, right? And like, I love making money playing music. I love, like, like I said, like, Dunia and I, my musical partner and wife, and your friend Dunia Best,
Yes.
and I have a new album coming out from a German label called GMO Records later this year. And I'm so happy about that. I'm happy that somebody else is going to be spending the money to market and promote, like, and put vinyl out on my behalf, and that that I'm going to make money from it. And we already licensed one of the tunes to a movie, and we're making money.
Awesome.
From it. It is awesome. I love making money, but but I love playing the bass more than I love making money from playing the bass. Like, I've got other ways to make money. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I only have
Yeah.
one way to experience,
The profound joy of music.
the profound joy of music. That's a perfect way of putting it. And I would rather play bass. I would rather play music that I love for $0 than play music that doesn't interest me for, the same amount of money that I make as a professor.
That's amazing. Well, I'm gonna wrap things up here, Aram. This was a really, really fun conversation, and I hope listeners that you enjoyed coming along for the ride and got some food for thought. Aram, we'll throw a bunch of links down to your website and about your books and about your music and about fun things like Stevie Wonder playing a talk box in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time and your incredible thoughts and insights.
Tristra, I love you, and it's always a pleasure to speak with you on or off the record, and I wish you and Dimitri all the best.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Music Tectonics. If you like what you hear, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We have new episodes for you every week. Did you know you can dig deeper into all our episodes with the show notes at musictectonics.com? While you're there, look for the latest about our annual conference, sign up for our newsletter to get updates, or get the Music Tectonics app for music tech news. Everything we do explores seismic shifts that shake up music and technology the way the Earth's tectonic plates cause quakes and make mountains. Connect with Music Tectonics on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and find me, Dimitri Vitsa, if you can spell it, on LinkedIn. Bye-bye!
You're listening to Music Tectonics.